Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, predicting the Week 1 depth chart for this Nebraska Cornhuskers program heading into the 2024 season. Now, we've talked about this roster from a ton of different angles over the last couple of weeks, and the thing that stands out to me the most, that I'm most excited for this Nebraska team, is the amount of versatility that you have on both sides of the football. And I think the challenge for guys like Matt Rhule and Tony White are, all right, how do we get the best players on the field at the same time in 2024? I want to talk about how this depth chart shakes out, give you guys some of my predictions on who wins some of these position battles. Really excited to get into it. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and a massive shout out to the Nebraska fans. Many of you guys know this is a program I love talking about, whether we're talking on the recruiting trail, in the transfer portal. Cannot thank you guys enough for rocking with the fellas. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And much more importantly, would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. And without further ado, let's get into this one. I want to start with the elephant in the room. That is the starting quarterback for this Nebraska program. And many of you guys know I am kind of on the Dylan Rhule train, and not only in terms of the talent that Dylan Rhule has. We have a lot of five-star quarterbacks that are extremely talented coming out of high school, but they don't start as true freshmen. Why I think Dylan Rhule can be a guy that comes in and immediately has an impact and starts for this Nebraska team is what's between the ears, right? You go back and watch the senior film at Buford for Dylan Rhule. This was a guy that took snaps under center, was calling out protections, a guy that I think is really developed mentally as a quarterback. And that's normally the barrier for a lot of young quarterbacks starting at the college level is, hey, can you call protections? Can you take snaps under center? Can you be a guy that goes through your progressions? I have a lot more confidence in Dylan Rhule than a lot of other quarterbacks because he was forced to do it at the high school level. Now, we all know Dylan Rhule has some of the best arm talent that we'll see in college football, but what he has between the ears, I think that's what sets him apart. And that's why I think we should be really confident that Dylan Rhule can come in and win this job. Now, the next position group I want to talk about, and arguably the position group that I'm most excited for, is the offensive line. And there are a lot of different reasons to be excited about what Matt Rhule is building in Lincoln. I think it starts with the offensive line development, and you saw it firsthand in 2023. This was an offensive line that early in 2023 against teams like Minnesota really struggled. And I thought this offensive line took some massive steps in the right direction during the 12 weeks of that season, something you never really saw under Coach Scott Frost, now predicting and projecting what this starting offensive line looks like for Nebraska in 2024. I want to start at the left tackle spot, where I'm going to go with Teddy. And a guy like Turner Cochran, we've seen a lot of, and we just haven't seen the consistency that we need from Turner Cochran to be your starting left tackle. And I quite frankly think you saw that from Teddy later on in that 2023 year. Then you work inside. I think the inside of this Nebraska offensive line is going to be very good. I don't think there's a bigger Justin Evan Jenkins fan than I am heading into 2024. Thought he played some really good football in 2023. Ben Scott at center. That's a huge blessing for Nebraska to have a very veteran center that's going to help ease Dylan Rhule into that quarterback spot. Ben Scott played a ton of football, not only for Nebraska, but also at Arizona State. Right guard, Mike Mazuka, again, another guy that has played a ton of football at a very high level across multiple Power 5 programs at Baylor and at Florida. And then Bryce Benhart at right tackle. And you look at that starting five, and I think a lot of Nebraska fans are saying that's a pretty damn good starting five for Nebraska on the offensive line. Now, the question mark is, can you build that depth behind those starting five? That's a massive question, but I really do like the starting offensive line that Nebraska has heading into 2024. Now, another reason to be optimistic about Nebraska heading into 2024 is the wide receiver play is going to take a massive step in the right direction. You look at what really hurt Nebraska in 2023. I think largely the injuries at wide receiver. You had quarterback roulette going on with a lot of different guys that didn't really get the opportunity to get a lot of rhythm, right? At the end of the day, Jeff Sims was the guy taking 80% of the quarterback one reps during spring practice and fall camp. and he wasn't really playing much for Nebraska in 2023. So you had young, inexperienced quarterbacks with not a lot of experience, and you had wide receivers that continued to get banged up. At a point, they were starting pretty much exclusively true freshman wide receivers. And so why am I so excited about this passing and taking a step? Not only does the offensive line get better, not only do we think we're going to get better quarterback play, this wide receiver room with a guy like Jamal Banks, who had 35 first down catches for Wake Forest last year, that true wide receiver one for Nebraska, that's massive. Then you look on the other side of the boundary, you have Isaiah Nayor, a guy that excels working and attacking that deeper third, which is massive because we all know Dylan Rhule is probably best asset is what he can do attacking downfield, throwing the deep ball. And I think you got a really interesting conversation in position battle with Isaiah Nayor and Malachi Coleman, a guy like Malachi Coleman, who we knew would probably go through some growing pains year one, but has a ton of potential, a ton of size, a ton of speed. That's a really interesting position battle on the outside, but I'm going to go Jamal Banks and Isaiah Nayor on the outside. And then on the inside, I'm going to go with Jalen Lloyd, who I think has a ton of juice, a 10-5 guy in the 100-meter, averaged almost 40 yards per catch last year. And I get that's a small sample size, but that kind of shows you the big plays that a guy like Jalen Lloyd can produce. This wide receiver room has a lot of veteran talent that has proven production, gives you that high floor, but a lot of young talent that also gives you that high ceiling. Last two positions we got to talk about. Tight end, Thomas Fidone, going to be my starting tight end. I'll just say this. Carter Nelson, I get taking a massive jump going from 8-man ball to Nebraska. He's going to be too athletic to keep off the field in my mind. I don't think he's going to be your starting tight end, but I do think Matt Rhule and that offensive staff are going to figure out ways to get Carter Nelson involved year one. And then the running back room, another position that I think on paper at least is significantly better than last year, right? We go back to this time starting the 2023 year off. Gabe Ervin goes down with an injury. Ramir Johnson goes down with an injury. Anthony Grant has problems holding onto the football. You're forced to go with Emmett Johnson, who was largely running back 4 heading into the season. Now you have Gabe Ervin, hopefully staying healthy. Dante Dowdle coming in the portal. Ramir Johnson getting back healthy. And Emmett Johnson, this running back room is deep. It's talented, and it has guys that excel doing different things. If you're asking for my prediction on your starting running back and the guy that gets the most carries and the most rushing yards, I'm going to go with Gabe Ervin Jr. if he can stay healthy. And if not, I think Dante Dowdle, the transfer from Oregon, comes in and carries that workload. I think this Nebraska offense has gotten better at pretty much every single position group across the board. And that really does excite me because you look over that defense, they're returning a lot of production. But more importantly, I mean, you're going year two, into Tony White's defense. That is, we expect this defense to maybe even get better heading into 2024. You want to see those turnovers. You want to see this defense force some more turnovers, and you want to see them, get a little bit more comfortable in what Tony White is trying to do. And this is where that versatility comes into play. You look at this depth chart and you say, all right, we got to get the best players on the field at the same time. Now, the best players on the field, Ty Robinson, Nash Hutmaker, that certainly it starts with those two, arguably some of the more dominant interior defensive line duos in the country there. I'm going to go Cam Lenhart getting that start as your defensive end. And again, Jamari Butler is going to play. You have a very deep defensive line. Cam Lenhart's a guy that I think is just going to be too hard to keep off the field going into year two. Now, this is where I'm going to make a few changes to what we see on the screen. You have Stephon Thompson. He's slated to play that jack linebacker, but what do we know about Stephon Thompson? He can play a multitude of different positions going back to his time with Tony White at Syracuse. I'm going to take Stephon Thompson to move back to that weak side linebacker spot to make some room for Prince Will Yu. I think Prince Will Yu, kind of similar to Cam Lenhart, probably just too good not to play and have a lot of playing time in 2024. And this is where it kind of comes into, all right, what's the best recipe to get our best players on the football field? Prince Will Yu, starting at that jack linebacker. I think he's probably the best pure pass rusher on this Nebraska team. And then you move Stephon Thompson to that will linebacker spot, and you have Javin Wright and Stephon Thompson playing that off-ball linebacker spot, and you can get creative with Stephon Thompson like Tony White will for sure do in 2024. But that's probably in my mind, you look at that front, and I think that's probably the best recipe for Nebraska going into 2024. And then the back end, I really do like this secondary, and I'm going to make a few changes, right? At your boundary cornerback spots, not many questions, right? Tommy Hill, Malcolm Hartzog, I think those two guys are absolute studs. I think Tommy Hill could be an All-American caliber cornerback for Nebraska. And then Malcolm Hartzog, we all know he can play. Now at the safety spot, you have Isaac Gifford as that strong safety. I would move him to that rover spot because I think that's where he's best suited. You want Isaac Gifford around the football. This is a guy that led the team in run stops last year. You want to put Isaac Gifford in the best spot possible for him, and I think that's at the rover spot, and that frees up a guy like Marcus Buford Jr., who we all have a ton of confidence in, to get playing time at that safety spot with Deshaun Singleton and Marcus Buford Jr. So you ask me, what's the best five in the back end for Nebraska? Tommy Hill and Hartzog at your boundary cornerbacks. You got, Deshaun Singleton and Marcus Buford Jr. at your safety spots. And then you kick Isaac Gifford down to that rover, down to that nickel role that Tony White gets super creative with. And I think that's probably your best five. And at the end of the day, I think Tony White has a lot of good problems on his hands. He's got a lot of good players with a lot of versatility. We didn't even include a guy like Mackay in that linebacker spot, who's certainly going to play a lot of football for Nebraska. I'm really excited about both sides of the football. Again, I think they get better at both sides. They bring in some nice transfers on offense. A lot of guys returning on this Nebraska defense going into year two of that Tony White scheme. If it comes together, there's a lot of reasons to be excited about this Nebraska team. Really excited to see how it shakes out during spring practice. We'll continue to talk about where guys are slated. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. Again, if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.